Well, good morning.
Good morning.
Couple of things. First of all, it's group participation time. Let me see your hands. Everybody still got all their fingers?
Yes.
Good. Happy 4th of July. Glad to know that. This morning, as we were getting this room ready, and people came and helped, it was wonderful, all the people that helped. It reminded me of working in a restaurant. Before it opened to the public, there was all sorts of craziness going on, every sorts of running around and tearing around and cleaning and getting everything ready. And then the moment that the doors opened, everything was so peaceful and calm and beautiful, as if none of that had ever happened. And I saw it happening again today. Tear around, get everything set up, and then, oh, welcome, it's so good to see you. I think we had a couple of people who saw behind the curtain, the little man working all the levers very quickly before we began. But that's how it goes. Now, Ralph Waldo Emerson said, "The purpose of life is not to be happy. It is to be useful, to be honorable, to be compassionate, to have it make some difference that you have lived and lived well." And Frank wrote, "No one has ever become poor by giving." And by that there should be more than finance, giving of themselves. Experts will tell you that if you're in a funk, one of the best ways to get out of it is go out the door and help somebody else. Get you out of your head. It heals you. Paul agrees wholeheartedly with all of these things, as he wrote with the Galatians today. And he has some suggestions on how we can make life together sweeter for each other and for ourselves. Paul is really concerned that Christians end up living a life together that is sweet for each other. He begins with, what do you do when somebody transgresses? And that's when they sin, or when they mess up, when they stumble, as eventually everyone does. Do you make them, and here we can have some group participation here, I'll ask you several questions and you can answer them. Do we make them walk the plank like in a pirate movie?
Depends on if they're your children or not.
Excluding your children. No, I hope? No. Do we vote them off the island? No. Do we judge them harshly, shun them, and ignore them as if they were dead to us? No. We don't do any of those things. When a person messes up, we guide them back. We restore them. And Paul says you do this with a spirit of gentleness. You don't go, woo! Because that just gets the other person going right back at you. And unless you're paid for that on a commentary show, it's really not very useful. So, but what is this gentleness of which Paul speaks? Well, God used gentleness to undercut all of the harsh powers of the world, all those rules that humans put down to smush other people when they thought they weren't doing the right thing. God uses gentleness to cut under all of that. Gentleness is kind of tricky. It's a sneaky thing. You can get right in there. That's how God uses it. Jesus described himself as gentle and humble in heart. Paul said that gentleness is one of the fruits of the Spirit. So gentleness is an important thing. Now Paul himself was a former persecutor of the Christian church, and he was very good at his job. And he realizes that not everyone comes by gentleness easily. And I think he probably included himself in that camp. He learned that there's virtues. The virtue of gentleness leads to humbleness. And Christians are called to be both gentle and humble. One leads to the other. It certainly worked out for Saul that way when he became Paul. That was a humbling experience. And it often begins, this humbleness and this gentleness begins by reviewing our own actions before attempting to humbly, gently correct someone else. You look at yourself and say, what have I done? That way you can bring someone who has been stumbling back gently. As all of us are important in the Christian community, all of us are important to the community of Christ's church. Jesus showed that over and over again. God shows it over and over again. All God's children are important. Martin Luther puts a fine point on it, and bear with me for a minute because he's a little technical. He's a few centuries old. We should so fear and love God as to not deceitfully to belie, betray, slander, or raise injurious reports against our neighbors, but apologize for him. Now, two things here. One, apology means to explain. An apologist for Christianity is not saying, I'm sorry it exists. It's saying, here's the details. This is what it means. And so you're explaining a person, not apologizing for them. And he uses what I'll call the royal he here. This was hundreds of years ago where he meant he and she, but they just said he. But nobody gets off on this one. Everybody is included. So, but apologize for him, speak well of him, and put the most charitable construction on all of his actions. This is considered to be the great test of Christianity and Christian humbleness. How do you treat a person who falls? How do you treat someone who has sinned, who has failed? How gentle will you be? It's a test. Paul begins, in fact, he begins this section with my friends. Gently. Says, and friends forgive each other. That's what friends do. And they help to set things right. And sometimes to help someone set things right when they really have fallen is to be humble enough to understand you can't fix it. And to gently guide that person to professional help. Oftentimes that is absolutely necessary. And this is what the early Christians did for Saul. When God told them to go speak to this guy, this Pharisee, this persecutor of Christians, this person that scared them half to death. You'll find him humbled in this place. Blind at the moment, as a matter of fact. You're going to help him become Paul. And by gently helping him on the way, they ended up making one of the greatest evangelists Christianity's ever had. Saul becoming Paul would end up preaching to much of the known world as he made his travels. It's amazing what gentle correction will do. It means looking out for each other, caring for each other, and praying for each other. As Paul told the Corinthians, take care of others so much that you'll avoid behavior that would make the weak stumble. You might be able to eat a juicy, succulent steak, but if you're around somebody with a heart condition, don't eat it, because you might make that person stumble. If you are so privileged as to be able to eat a massive chocolate sundae with marshmallow, cherries, and I gotta stop. But you're around somebody with diabetes, don't do it, because you don't want them to stumble, which would be much harder on them than it is on you. Don't do it. That's what Paul would say. He also means avoiding judgment of others as well. We don't know the paths people walk. We don't know what led them to the position they're in. We don't know what wounds they've carried. So don't judge. In fact, judging itself is considered a form of stumbling. So watch out. And it says, in Matthew, Jesus says, do not judge so that you may not be judged. And when you think about it, that's saying, what standard would you rather be judged by? Your own fallible human standard, or God's far more gracious one? If you don't want to be judged by how you are, then don't judge others. Otherwise, you'll be judged by your own lights rather than God's. So, good to avoid that one. For with the judgment you make, you will be judged. And Jesus, of course, went on then to gently tell a story that made people laugh and do that, and said, you know, make sure you take the log out of your own eye before you try to take the speck out of somebody else's. And he was speaking of the Pharisees at that point. That made them really laugh. But everybody got the point. Gently. Be slow to condemn, be charitable, grow in consideration and understanding, and in this way you'll be free. And you'll help others to be free. There's freedom in this. Paul goes further, and he guides the people. Says another part of making life sweeter together is bearing our own burdens and the burdens of others. Life is often a very heavy lift. Would you agree with that? Yeah. And sometimes trying to do it alone will flatten us. Will it not? Absolutely. Paul recommends that we lift together. Each person doing their own work because we each face our own responsibilities, and also helping others to do the same. And being humble enough to accept help when we need it. To actually say, I could use a little hand here. Would you help me lift this particular load? So that's where the humility comes in again. So, this is why Jesus creates the church, as a matter of fact, allowing us to live in community together so that we can help each other. So that we can help lift each other up. We can't do it all by ourselves. The old business about bootstraps really doesn't work a lot of the time. We often find that we weren't gifted with all the skill sets we actually need to accomplish certain tasks. We need the help of someone else from time to time. And the church community brings together many gifted people with many different gifts and different understandings that is useful for everyone. In fact, church benefits people in 5 different ways. 1, worship, including communion. Education, service, fellowship, and one that gets overlooked most of the time, and that's shared experience. We kind of forget that one most of the time. We overlook shared experience, although it's incredibly important. But it's also tricky. Because we all try to hide behind masks. You know, when somebody's walking by, you say, how you doing? What do you expect to hear? Fine. Yeah. In fact, if somebody tells you how they're really doing, you don't have time for this. You know, you're supposed to say fine. In fact, it's an image that we cultivate on social media. Notice that if you're on social media, all of your friends are all going to incredibly exotic and wonderful places. Nobody ever has a flat tire. Nobody ever has a broken door or a tree that needs to come down. It's always beautiful. It's like the dread Christmas letter you get from that family that's really successful. You know? Our son went to Harvard. Our daughter won the Nobel Prize. And all that. But we're not like that. That's not how life is, really. So when we share, what we share should be uplifting and humbling. We're testifying and confessing what Jesus has done in our own messy lives. Like when we share our prayer times together. It's a time to hear about how God worked in our lives and to uplift each other. It's not a time for depressing, degrading sorts of things, but the times of the things that can encourage each other to do better. It shows others that they're not alone in their suffering. And it's inspirational to hear of Jesus' actions. So many times I hear people say they came to church and they looked around and they've got this huge burden and everybody looks fine. And they felt terrible because they thought they were the only one suffering. That's that mask. And it causes a real problem. One reality in sharing burdens, however, is there's a responsibility that each of us have that remains ours. We still are responsible for getting our jobs done. And in the end, we're reminded that we all stand before God to give account for what we did alone. That's where the responsibility again comes in for all of this. We pray that we'll make moral choices with our burdens, that we'll, and this gets back to a first instruction of helping each other when we stumble. Sometimes we don't make the best choices in how to deal with those burdens, and helping getting each other gently back on the rails and back heading down the right path. And this brings us back to chapter 5 in Paul, where he says, "For the whole law is summed up in a single commandment. You shall love your neighbor as yourself." We're all coming back to this. All of this is a way to do that. Paul warns that time is short. And I don't mean eschatological time, meaning Jesus coming down on a cloud and all that. Our time is short because we're mortal. We are finite. And so we need to do what we can while we can, while it's still possible to do something. How we treat each other matters immensely in this world. Guiding with meekness leads to avoiding gossip. It leads to thinking charitably of everyone, approaching a new person as another child of God. And wait, you can approach people defensively, people are going to do me wrong, or you can look at a person and think charitably of them and let them prove they're right or disappoint you. At which point you can start guiding them. It's a mindset. And it reminds us that except for Jesus and our Christian friends' gentle help, we would stumble far more often than we do. There, but for the grace of God go I, is something worth remembering. It helps us to, when we treat people this way, it helps to heal damage that has been done, wounds that people are carrying when they have encountered brittle and irritable, sharp-tongued, suspicious, and severe people. Remember I said I was in the restaurant business for a while, and I never could understand the people that would come in and treat the person trying to help them so badly. So bad, because it was the one place they could go and do that. There's that severe person, or someone who needs a better outlet for their stress. And I always wonder why people don't think that why do I treat a person badly who then can come back at me? You really want to treat your food server badly? No. That food's not always in your sight. I worked in that business, trust me. You gotta watch that. It's better to be good to people. And you don't feel that the work is done until a person's been restored in their relationship to the church community and to God. And we discover when we do this that there's a freedom in pardoning others and being pardoned by them. So getting grudges out of your system. And know that other people are going to do the same to you. It's knowing that each person has each other's backs. Responsibly sharing our experiences and our burdens keeps life fresh for all of us. Our faith and our courage and conviction and association is built up when we share. It gets better. But it's also like this manna out in the wilderness. Remember the story of the manna in the wilderness? You have enough for today. Eat it all up because you cannot hoard it. You cannot keep it for tomorrow. It will rot. Use it. It's meant for your use. All of this is meant to be used. This is not meant to be hoarded. It does you no good if you keep it to yourself. It only works if you share. We often discover in the sharing that there's a surprising thing that happens. You think, there's not a thing that I know that would be useful to another person until you start sharing and another person, a light bulb goes off and says, that's it! That's what I needed to know. And you, huh? I've known that all my life. It's like, I had one individual in seminary, I showed him a system that I use to write reports based on working with a computer, and he jumped up and gave me a huge bear hug and said, "Where have you been all my years of seminary?" I didn't know it was a thing, but it was desperately needed by someone else. So, that's how this works. In fact, there's a hard understanding that Henry Nouwen provides. There's a statement, he says, there's strength in our weakness. We can help each other out of our weakness, out of the things that have gone wrong in our lives, and we've figured out, with others' help, how to get over. Well then, we can pass that along. There's strength in that weakness. We've learned something. For instance, I'm not one who's really comfortable with sharing what's going on with my health. But I've done that, and I've found other people with the same problems, and we've swapped notes on what we've done that worked, and it made life sweeter for both of us, and made us both stronger because we were armed with better information. Didn't have to Google it either. We just shared it. It was really nice. Well, we're all responsible for our own burdens, whether we come by them from misadventure or through catastrophe, natural or man-made disasters, or they're burdens that we've chosen to undertake. We discover that we're strengthened and our worries are lessened about our burdens when others help us and we help them. Shoulder the loads. It puts our burdens in perspective, and we gain insights on how to handle them. In fact, individuals who are a nervous wreck, worrying about their own circumstances, have frequently been calmed by going and helping someone else, and their nerves steadied out. Others needed professional help. Got to keep that plug going because it's serious. But still, it's just a regular sort of worry. Got smoothed out by helping somebody else. As we prepare to share communion today, I want you to reflect on how much sweeter life is together in the family of God. You can't do communion with just one person. It's a group thing. Baptists, a lot of what we do is a group thing. Even if I'm only giving communion to you in the hospital, that's still two of us. I want you to ponder how better to love your neighbors, as Jesus commands us and as Paul advises. And when we do, we'll live freer lives and we'll walk closer with Jesus every single day of our lives. Let's pause for a moment of quiet reflection. Amen.